So we'll just get started and start having this conversation. So Steve, if you can go ahead and progress the screen. I don't remember the topics in the order we were going to do them. All right. This is the one that's the most puzzling to me because we are pretty, I don't think we've reached 50% of companies who are actually generating SBOMs through their pipeline. So why aren't we? If you are generating an SBOM in your pipeline for every single project, raise your hand. It's just not enough of us, right? So let me hear from those of you who have what you went through to get there, so that others can, so you can have a conversation about that. Is there one of you guys are? If you could state your name and who you work for and your title.
Sure, I'm Ralph Bean. I work for Red Hat and architect on the Conflux pipeline. And we gave a talk on Monday about what we do to build our SBOMs. It's somewhat of a special process. We're orchestrating around the build and prefetching dependencies and so on to be sure about them. But our fallback from that is Sift as like an easy tool to statically analyze a repo and get an SBOM out of it. We have some historic tools that generated the equivalent of what SBOMs are today, but without the standard formats for that, going back, in older decades of Red Hat.
A follow-up question for you. Is upper management pushing for an SBOM to be added, or are you doing it voluntarily?
Definitely both.
Both.
Brett Smith. I work for SAS Institute in North Carolina. We spent 2 years writing out automation to do our security scans, and we put SBOM scanning into that automation, so it's done regardless of whether anytime the pipelines run. We collect up those SBOMs, we store them, and then we use them for internal projects like registering our third-party dependencies and checking the health of our projects, and then we have to give them to potential customers sometimes. So Accenture has asked us for several SBOMs for our products. And then to answer the question of who is asking for them, well, first of all, I have to make them because of the executive order. And second of all, my management is all in agreement that we should do this, and it's great. And my security team and my compliance team are like, we have to do this. And so my SBOMs are actually, some of them are attached to revenue. And so no government contract if I don't produce an SBOM. So anybody who has not run into that, it's coming. So.
SBOMs attached to revenue, that's an interesting idea, right? Let's hear from you, some of you who have not added SBOMs, and we're curious why, and if you've evaluated what it might require in order to add SBOMs. Anybody want to chat about?
My name is Quentin Hartman. I'm a consultant with Heartcraft Technology Services, and I had a prior client who tried to get SBOMs going, and they did some tooling evaluation, and after seeing that several tools gave them different results, they gave up because they didn't know who to trust.
Anybody else run into that as an objection to adding SBOMs?
We didn't object to the SBOMs, but they definitely aren't complete and right. And we're struggling with the tooling generating proper SBOMs that are fully complete and correct. So it's been an interesting journey.
Is there anybody from OpenSSF here?
Sorry, I've just got a question back to one of the concerns I had was maybe it's tied to incomplete. I'm curious what was incomplete in your case. In our case, we looked at, we can generate an SBOM for Java, but not for the JavaScript that's included in the thing. We can do some portion of it, but it's really not representing the whole thing.
Yeah, if you watch Adam's talk on playback, Adam goes over really well on how things get into your software and then get blended up into a giant soup where you can't discern what they are. And so that's why those guys are using hermetic builds and prefetching their dependencies so that they know what they are. Still not guaranteed to be perfect, but it's better than nothing. But the curl pipe bash problem exists, right? Developer curl pipe bash is something in the middle of a build, and there's no way to detect it. Sometimes Prisma and Twistlock catch it for us in the container scan. So I have two SBOMs. I have a source SBOM that I give customers and a container SBOM. And then when I give them the SBOM, they proceed to run it through a scanner and send me back a 30,000 line Excel spreadsheet of CVEs and ask me when I'm going to fix them.
How do you resist throttling the customer that did that? Because that's exactly what we get in the open source projects. Jenkins gets these bogus reports. Oh, my scanner says you must resolve this. It's not a bug. Stop. Go away.
So they
You've got a commercial relationship.
Yeah, well, so they've put people with feelings in between me and the customer, and I'm not allowed to talk to the customers. And I'm not allowed to talk to the people with feelings. They have people to interpret what I've said and run it through AI so it's cleaned up and then distribute it to the nice people who then talk to the customers.
You know, that is, I haven't heard this problem that SBOMs potentially are not accurate. I have heard the problem of spewing CVEs out, and that the noise is actually part of the problem of we're not addressing things, because when things get noisy, it just becomes kind of it's deaf. You become deaf to it. Anybody else, yeah, that's not generating SBOMs? Why not?
I have just a comment to that sentence, to that what you just said about scanning SBOMs. If you don't have SBOM and you run a scanner, then you have reverse engineering approach. It's even worse than having SBOM, because at least you have some kind of reference. If scanner finds something there, analyze and claims that it's vulnerable, so it's not a scanner fault, it's a not precise SBOM problem. If you don't have SBOM and you scan a container image and there is something, it's just reverse engineering. I have no idea how it was built, so it's just best guesses. At least if you have SBOM, you have some starting point how to fix the problem, how to address the problem of false positives.
So, but isn't the risk that, well, isn't the container scan still just another exercise in reverse engineering? It seems like that's also reverse engineering by looking at content of the container. Somehow or other, you're always, okay, the SBOM says it's there, but then your scanner says, oh, but I looked inside and I see other things.
Some of the scan tools are clever, and they use the RPM database, right? And they rip out the RPM database out of your container, and they run through it, and they go, oh, this is all the stuff you have. And there's tons of stuff in there that wasn't installed with RPM. And then other scanner companies like Twistlock, they do both. They rip out the RPM database, they run through it, and they go, okay, you've got these versions of the RPMs in here, and I found all this stuff on disk. Oh, let me take this jar apart and see what's inside of that. Let me take this war apart. The guys from Twistlock were pretty good at it. But then they fingerprint it, and then they use that fingerprint to go look up stuff in the CVEs, right? What if they run into stuff they hadn't fingerprinted before? Like the stuff you built last night. So this completely accurate SBOMs is a very, very complicated problem.
So if there's a takeaway, because we have other topics, I want to go ahead and move on unless there's somebody else who wants to add something to the conversation. Is there a takeaway that we should bring back to the Open Source Security Foundation? And it sounds like more accurate SBOMs is an issue. I'm seeing a lot of heads say yes. Because if you're not getting strong SBOMs, then maybe there isn't a reason to generate one, right? I mean, yes.
Can I ask for like a show of hands here? Can I ask for a show of hands of people who are generating SBOMs? Are you doing something valuable with them? Or maybe, can I get the reverse of that? Who's generating SBOMs is not doing anything valuable with them? Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's great. Great, thank you.
Sometimes SBOMs can be security theater, I think is what you're saying, right? Is sometimes SBOM generation might be to satisfy a checklist that someone requires. Oh, yeah. Okay, and that could be very business valuable still. Checklists matter in businesses, so it's not a problem. It's just, it can be sometimes just theater. Okay.
I think there's valuable things you can do with them. But I bet a lot of people don't know.
Yeah. So just to add a bit to the conversation, there's a couple of things. So one, generating accurate SBOMs is hard. But the second side is, what do you do with it? And that's what the ecosystem, what are you finding the vulnerabilities? What are they called? The CVE strings, the Perl strings. How are you actually looking up the correct things? Are you getting the right data? That's also an unsolved problem that causes lots of issues for us.
Could you add your name? And
Oh yeah, sorry. My name's Phil Austin. I work at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. I lead our product cybersecurity group. And then the second thing is, back to what are you doing with SBOMs? Like, well, if you're distributing SBOMs, that's great as long as everything's getting updated quickly. So my company supports critical infrastructure, electricity, utilities, things like that, where updates are often very, very long delayed. And so releasing, oh, hey, here's this nice SBOM manifest for an attacker to go look up and be aware of all components out there is actually a security risk.
You need confidential computing.
So the only last question I have around SBOMs is aggregating SBOMs in a Kubernetes decoupled architecture. Is that a struggle? Are companies addressing that? I know there's some tooling out there that allows you to do it. I'm just curious how much of that is a problem for adding SBOMs to the workflow. So you wrote something to merge the SBOMs. Yeah, so this concept of a application level SBOM in a Kubernetes environment may not have been something that you're thinking about, but potentially if you are like him and have to do it in order to get paid, you are doing it. And I think for critical infrastructure, it may be an issue, at least a discussion as well. Okay, so, yeah, oh.
Bob Walker, I work for Octopus Deploy. It kind of also goes back to what do you do with the SBOM? So the concept of merging SBOMs. The big question for us has always been, what do you want to do with the SBOM first? And then from there is like, okay, what challenges do we run into? Is merging the biggest problem that we're faced versus how we're going to distribute it, how we're going to do all those other things. So oftentimes it's like step 10, and right now we're on step 1.
Isn't the outcome ultimately is to find out security vulnerabilities and get them to fixed? What other alternatives could there be for SBOMs? Yeah, licensing, yes. Right. Copyright, okay, sure.
We have other mitigation efforts for security, vulnerability things.
Yeah.
There's a CISO working group that put out a white paper, I think it's in draft, with like 13 use cases for SBOMs. So like, what would you want to do? Only half of them applied to me. But.
That's interesting. Yeah, I understand the licensing one, but I'm interested in the rest of them.
Okay, we're going to have to move on. Let's talk a little bit about what we often call a gold pipeline. What are you adding to these gold pipelines? Do you have a real basic pipeline? Are you trying to increase what you're doing in those pipelines? And what is your opinion about the plugins? Are we moving away from it? Is there another way we should be doing that? And that will bring us into AI and what we might be able to do in the CD pipeline in a better way in the future. And if we are going to do that, we have to start building that foundation now, right? So do you have gold pipelines? Do you have a basic gold pipeline? Do you have different pipelines, as we heard in one of the last talks? Who are you building it for? And how do you distribute those pipelines? And are developers updating them independently once you have if they've gotten a gold pipeline, do they add themselves tooling for their own uses?
Andrew from Red Hat, Andrew McNamara. I guess I'll talk because you referred to the presentation we had earlier. There's not one pipeline necessarily, but the pipeline has multiple scanners and tools in it. So the pipeline, it's a Tecton pipeline, and it's everything's distilled down to run within specific tasks. So I hadn't ever really considered it as a pipeline architecture or a plugin architecture, but essentially it is, because you can have some scanner which runs, it's just a CLI, where you wrap it in a Tecton task and a task definition, and you can run it, and the results from that, as long as it meets whatever our API that we have defined for how to parse results, then we can use it in policy decisions. But like the default pipeline we have is for container images, but we're also building a pipeline for RPMs and I mean, kind of getting on to other topics. Like if there's a different type of artifact that we need to produce, then we can generate a pipeline that is customized for it and might have more or fewer scanners if those scanners are relevant or aren't relevant for those specific artifact types. But the pipelines themselves are distributed as Tecton bundles, or it's just a Tecton pipeline definition that you can refer to.
And can you update that for the development teams, or do they start making changes to it?
Both. So the question was, can we update it, or can the developers make changes? Both. We can keep the tasks updated, because if the task that's run is a trusted task, they can't touch it. So we have to make sure that it stays updated, that all of the images it uses for running those containers are updated. If there's any bug fixes or features, we have to keep pushing that out. So we have a renovate-based process that we call Maker that proposes those updates to those references that we control. But the pipeline is in the developer's repository, and so they can customize it. They can choose to not use our tasks, our definitions, but that just means that if they take something out that's critical, they won't be able to actually release the artifacts. So it's this balance of how can we help them do something that they want to do securely, but also allow them to discover new functionality, new tooling, new areas of interest to them.
It comes to the question of how agile our pipelines are. We've been preaching agile development, but I don't know how agile our pipelines are. So how many here are using a standard pipeline? There's like 5. I mean, there's several of us in here, and there's probably 5 people raising their hands. And the most then, the development teams are creating their own pipelines. Is that the alternative? Yes. Yeah, so that's what most of you are doing, is developers create their own pipelines. And do you have a compliance level for those pipelines? The ones we just heard about, you get a gold standard, right? And you have to that's your compliance levels. Do pipelines have compliance levels? We've heard about policies.
Yes. In order to meet the executive order, you have to use my pipeline.
Okay. So since that might not have been picked up for the recording, the response was that for meeting the Executive Order 14028 is what I'm assuming you're referring to, there is a gold standard for maintaining a compliant pipeline. Okay. What should we be doing then as a CD Foundation, right? We're supposed to be providing thought leadership in this space. What are we not doing to make pipelines easier to use? Is there something we should be talking about? Is there a special interest group that should be put together? What should we be doing? If you were to sit here and say, hey, CD Foundation, this could help us in pipeline management, what would that look like? All right, The software supply chain SIG needs to be reborn.
Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah, I want to take a page out of Horowitz's.
Name, yes.
Oh, sorry, Tim Plimpton from the state of Delaware. Horowitz did a great presentation on open telemetry and the importance of semantic conventions. And I think that it probably the most important thing that CD can do is provide semantic conventions for pipeline components that help to delineate functionalities and feature sets between various products, that it's not so much that you're using this product or this tool, it's that you're meeting this criteria of functionality and feature set regardless of the tools, and setting the standard, helping set the standards of what boxes that do need to be checked based on what those, conventions are. And if such a thing does exist, I apologize for my ignorance, but there are so many possible ways to pipeline, and it's very easy to get mixed up in the jargon of what's doing what, and we might SBOM in 2 or 3 different places. We might not do it at all, but where are the essential places where it needs to happen, and how can we define the type of functionality that is and where it happens in the pipeline? And can we just make that definition clear?
So in the software supply chain SIG, we worked on a document that helps you judge the maturity of your pipeline, and it had a bunch of check boxes in there. And so there's a lot of stuff already in the CD Foundation that can help you do this. I mean, CD events can help you standardize how you do your events in your pipeline, record the events, and then to one of Tracy's favorite words, it gives you interoperability and a common dictionary of words that you can use. And then because pipelines are so diverse, right, but if we can use the same language to describe events, and we have a way to describe the events, like through CD events, right, that are standardized, then you have interoperability. And then when you write a tool, you just write the tool to consume the CD events or whatever, and use the language that we have said is this is the standard on how we speak to this stuff. And then as new tools pop up, they're still interoperable. And then those are the things that we can do now, that we just need to fire the SIG back up and start publishing those docs again.
To kind of go off of what he was saying, so pipelines are, my name's Jamie O'Byrne and I work at JP Morgan Chase. So pipelines are just an abstraction, so they can be across tools or done by one tool. And so the interoperability part and having common language is very important. There's a talk tomorrow that DC is going to be doing about extending that. And so for us, like, what is a gold pipeline? It's just a bunch of integrations, like bespoke integrations to our own internal policy stuff. Maybe this is something that some of the stuff that DC will be talking about tomorrow with workflow segments and orchestration could kind of help.
I was, excuse me, my name's Adam with Adobe. I was thinking about this idea earlier, like, if you can generate, what we need is the pipelines or some tool to accurately tell us what is happening inside the pipelines. And it seems like Salsa and Toto, tools like in SBOMs, give us an accurate representation of, can help provide us a better representation of what is being built. Then we need some way to consume those events to assess, does this meet policy? Does this meet, is it introducing vulnerabilities or something like that? And I think that side of it is not really well defined yet, but it's too complicated for us to try to wrangle all the pipelines out there into one kind of, to be able to actually assess, are they secure or not? We just have to be able to see like what the events are going on in there and then evaluate the events after they've occurred for us to assess vulnerability or security of it.
So come to my talk tomorrow, and I'm going to talk about Event Provenance Registry, where you can store your events in a REST service that's not really REST, it's GraphQL. Everybody calm down. And it stays in Postgres, and you get an audit trail, and we can talk about that too. It's a bolt-on. It's not something that cares that you're running Tecton or cares that you're running Jenkins or cares that you're running GitHub Actions, it's, you can curl your results to it. And then if you want to use in toto, you could generate your in toto provenance, put it into the payload, and blast it into this thing, and we'll store it for you. I'm only doing this because I really need help contributors to come help me finish it because it's not done.
So I'm at Red Hat, but I'm also a steering committee for Salsa and a maintainer. And so, like what you're saying about the provenance and how can you actually trust it, I think that that's something that it's important to call out, that like we're generating this metadata, but how do you actually assess it? The intention is, I mean, you have to have a baseline for the trust, and a lot of times you can't assess that yourself, and so there is some need for verifiers. There's the verification summary attestation as well, where if there is somebody that you could defer trust to, and there is some organization or some verification generator that consume these artifacts, or you could submit artifacts to and say, hey, what does it actually mean about it? That becomes challenging too, because different provenance attestations have a lot different information, what you can actually say in terms of how much you might want to trust it. It's really hard because what you trust might not be the same thing that I trust. You can have Salsa provenance level 3, but that can mean very different things, because that says nothing about vulnerabilities. It says nothing about tests. It just says we know what the inputs were, and we know that those inputs were used, and that there's, if you have level 3, that you have isolation, and this is a cryptographically signed key and whatnot. So like we have to, I think having the information, having the metadata is beneficial, but we have to know the bounds of it in order to inform those decisions.
One thing I wanted to, I think about all the time is what I call the day 300 problem. So what I mean by the day 300 problem is that our applications are constantly changing. There's always going to be the next Kubernetes. There's always going to be the next executive order, the next SBOM that comes out. There's always going to be something that happens. And so how do we, as an organization, how do we handle that type of thing, the next thing that comes out? So when I was a developer, I started off deploying to bare metal machines, and then we deployed to virtual machines. Now I'm deploying to Kubernetes. Now I have all these other things that constantly keep changing. How do we get that change pushed out to all of the enterprise and have it be compliant and have it be secure, and constantly be thinking about how do we push these updates out, but make it super easy to do something along those lines? That's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of enterprises face every day. Oh, Bob Walker.
As a consultant, one of the things that I face consistently is clients who underinvest in their pipelines. Once they get to something that can push something out to QA, that's good enough, and they stop adding all of the extra things that would provide value. And so something that I think would be valuable for the Linux Foundation or an organization like it to provide would be a set of best practices that I could point to and say, this is the standard set of things that a pipeline should do. So that way there's more than I say so behind the weight of those statements.
So I'll quickly plug to answer that. There is a best practices website that the CD Foundation built. And on top of that, we're doing a CI/CD cybersecurity website that goes through the secure software development framework and makes an attempt, and so far it's an attempt, to map the tasks that can be completed through the DevOps pipeline to tools that you need to use. So if you are interested in getting involved in either of those projects, I know the best practices group would love to have some life breathed into it. And we're doing a lot of good work right now at that, at the CI/CD Cybersecurity SIG. You can find all of that on the cd.foundation website, because those are pieces of the puzzle that they have started and worked on in the past.
Maybe it's on the best practices site, and I need to go look at that. But one of the things that we've been having difficulty with was So Sigstore, for instance, is built great for the open source community, but at Adobe, we want to adopt it internally, and what's the best way to do that? We feel like there are components of it that is oriented towards open source community and not necessarily the commercial use cases that we have. So I think if there were best practices that describe how smaller businesses or bigger enterprises can adopt these open source tools for ways that best suit their use case, that would be very helpful. It took us a lot of work to figure out how we want to go about doing that, and I imagine we're not the only ones that went through that, and others are going to do the same thing.
I'm delighted to hear that you've been through the adoption. Would you be willing to share it publicly? Or some corporations will say, no, you're absolutely forbidden to share that publicly. That's private, confidential, et cetera.
So I was just talking to my peer over here, Bogdan, he actually helped design a lot of that as well. I was telling him, hey, we need to do a talk on all the stuff that we've been designing for how we're thinking about implementing Sigstore signing and other things like that, because like I said, it was not trivial for us to figure out.
So if we had you do a webinar, for instance, do you think Adobe would sign off on allowing you to speak publicly?
Yes.
They would? Okay,
for sure.
Good.
For sure.
Because, Tracy, I think we can do webinars, and that would give us a place to give you a talk platform without having to do a conference in order to get you to the talk.
Yes, we could do some webinars. We could push the CD Foundation to kind of start doing some more webinars to share that information. So this brings me to two other questions that's on this list, and one is, are you keeping track of what the OpenSSF is doing in terms of the tooling around SBOMs and other tools that they are starting to produce, and thinking about adding those to your pipeline? Well, we have one yes, of course. I'm going to note for the record that it's coming from the person who has to comply with the government. So if you're interfacing with the public sector, you're probably going to say yes. If you're in private enterprise, though, probably not so much, it looks like. How many of you have looked at, like, Protobomb? The government sector.
But the reality for me is I didn't look at FIPS until FIPS became a thing for more. I didn't look at FIPS until FIPS became a thing for more than just the government. But the people who did FIPS, it was incredibly valuable. They had done a bunch of investment to get FIPS in places that mattered to us. So the fact that, yeah, exactly, that kind of game where others are paying the price for me, but I'm going to eventually pay that price. I know I will, right? Someday, healthcare will decide, oh, we need to comply with executive order, or finance, or you pick it. Yeah, which
Keep going.
I'm going to confront them, but I haven't had to yet.
All right. So
They'll come for you eventually.
there was a, the statement about pipelines have just really a gold pipeline is a set of interoperable standards, and I know the CD events team has worked really hard on that. What is everybody's thoughts about an MCP server to start building out these gold pipelines internally, or having the CD Foundation work on an MCP server for DevOps tooling?
This is Brett again. Non-deterministic gremlins with an MCP server? Are you serious?
I am serious.
You're amazing, Tracy. Sign me up. I want to see this. I'm bringing my popcorn. I'm bringing my torch.
Okay, I would suggest all of you look at what Zapier has done in the last 3 months.
Say it again.
Zapier.
Zapier?
So Zapier is a tool that if you're in marketing, you know very well. And they have built out many MCPs to connect these tools. There's another company called Active Pieces, and they're starting to build out MCPs for the DevOps pipeline. It is a very interesting model, and we're going to get disrupted, right? Our industry is going to be disrupted. We're not going to stay the same forever. So I'm going to encourage you all to take a look at these tools and to see how they're building these interoperable components.
So does everybody understand the MCP idea? All right. So the MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And what you do is you take your APIs. So if you have a set of RESTful APIs, you can take that list, basically your Swagger doc, throw it at another MCP to generate your MCP. And what this does is it gives you basically like an API gateway. So your tool, let's say GitHub, is going to have an MCP server or toolkit that's going to have ways to talk to it. I need to create an issue. I need to do a push. I need to do a merge. I need to comment on a merge. Those are going to be the types of interfaces that you have to GitHub through the MCP server. Now what this does is it's going to, because remember the second is Model Context Protocol, it's going to allow you to take and slim down the context that your LLM is going to work in. So instead of going out to Llama 7 billion parameter and let it chug along and figure out what you want it to do for creating a GitHub issue, it knows that it's going to slim down that context that the LLM's working in. So it's going to bring down your cost and is going to give you a more accurate result. So what's going to happen is there'll be a MCP for GitHub, MCP for GitLab, MCP for Tekton, MCP for Jenkins, MCP for turning on your coffee pot. All that will be bundled together, and what ends up happening is the chatbots will talk to each other through those MCPs. So I'll be able to say, for example, in ChatGPT, go take this repo, build it, and deploy it. And in that simple sentence, because it's backed by the MCPs, it'll be understand how it's going to go connect to GitHub, how it's going to do a Go build, how it's going to go ahead and create a container, a Docker image, and then how to deploy it. All that will happen in that one sentence when you're talking to the LLM. So that's the concept that's going to happen. Like Tracy said, Zapier has a bunch of these to integrate. Yeah, there's like 3,000. So I want to integrate Salesforce with Jira. That's already done. You just tell it, take this Salesforce update, make the Jira issue for that. So let's just give a little background on what we're talking about in the AI LLM world. So now I've piqued some interest.
Yeah, so Bob Walker, Octopus Deploy again. So we have been investigating this whole concept of the MCP, using it to, can we generate pipelines with it? And one of the more interesting things that we found was when we talked to our customers, we're talking FSIs, healthcare, all that other good stuff. Every single time we brought up, hey, you can create a pipeline using a command line interface, it went over like a lead balloon. No one cared. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways that we learned from that, because they're all about, we want to build pipelines that are specific to our corporation, that are specific to our standards and our company policies and our regulations. And I think that's one of the things that an MCP server is going to miss out on, is that context. Because the thing you have to understand with AI is that you're building to the median. You're not building to like a particular company policy. Now, one of the things we did add in there is the ability that we could actually inject our own opinions into our ability to generate pipelines, where you say, okay, we want to generate a pipeline that deploys to Kubernetes, for example. Well, then we said, okay, that's great, but we're going to actually inject some other things on top of that. So I thought that was probably one of the more interesting things. But what a lot of the folks tended to really gravitate towards was more along the lines of, help me understand what my pipeline is doing. Help me understand why it's something that's failing. Help me understand kind of this kind of tier 0 type of support versus I need to onboard quickly.
Yeah. So there's another part of this whole puzzle that you kind of bring up around the internal policies and procedures. And what ends up on that side is what's called a RAG. So actually point part of your LLM over to those policies. So it's kind of separated. So you have your main LLM that has all the vectors in it and stuff like that. Then you have your RAG that is like a data source that the LLM can consume, that it'll consume all your policy documentation. And then that'll help give you a better end result decision making for that tailored pipeline, for example, if you wanted to generate a pipeline. What Tracy's is talking about is actually having MCPs and the LMs talk to each other and actually go out and do work, go out and run a Jenkins pipeline or a part of a Jenkins pipeline. And then when that results back, come back and then let me go out and update a JIRA issue that says that it's been deployed or something like that. So it's along the same lines as the CD events, but a different approach to the interoperability at that level, where you actually leave the MCP do work and then come back at that level. This is all theoretical. We're putting the initial POC together at Ortelius around this, but stay tuned. It's an interesting space. That's why I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought about the whole AI pipeline. Yeah.
So I'm already doing this. I don't have any MCP servers. But I already have an event system. I build something. I make an event. I have things that catch the event and they go do stuff. Similar.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, I already got this and it's not non-deterministic, it's deterministic.
Right. So what well, what it is it's where do you start and how easy. I mean, I'm sure you worked on putting the event system together for over a year would be my guess. Yeah. So that's where the idea of the MCP is to help simplify this process to be able to introduce signing. FIPS could be a policy that you need to address. How does that happen? Do I need to spin up a secure container as part of the Tecton process? You know, those type of things. We need the different inputs to be able to make better decisions and give the flexibility at the pipeline level.
I just want to agree with, I think, what you were saying, that the ability to read CD events or anything and help a user diagnose why an existing pipeline failed sounds like a really clear and useful use case for MCP for me. The idea of using MCP servers to write or perform the build, like you suggested, what if we had an MCP server that, you know, as part of some workflow, the LLM would then trigger a Jenkins build? Well, why even have Jenkins? Like the LLM could just use the MCP server to do a Go build locally. It'd be simpler in a way, but then like, what are we going to say about provenance in this case? Like how do you have guarantees? How do you have certainties about the content from an enterprise and organizational point of view? Maybe there's answers to that, but it really upends that.
Yeah, it does. It does really upend it, and part of it is, and we haven't gotten to that point yet, of being able to give it enough context for it to go ahead and say, I need to go connect to, I'm going to go and run this build in AWS Lambda that's isolated and that I'm going to destroy and take down. That could be where the build actually happens for a Go program. We don't know yet how the resources, the underlying resources that are going to be used need to come about and how they come into play. I'm guessing they're going to be policy driven, like you're saying. I need to be FIPS compliant. I need to have isolation. I need to have X, Y, and Z. And that's going to help drive the decision of what resources get spun up.
So, okay, I'm turning backwards again to Bob's point and yours. It's that I write pipelines 100x or 1,000x less than I run them. It's just the reality, right? I run them an awful lot more, and therefore failure diagnosis seems a lot more interesting to me than initial authoring. Okay, and in my standardized world, I don't want most people authoring them anyway, because I'd like them to use my components, thank you very much, because I did the work that figured out how to do it well, and thank you, please don't write your own, use mine, and we'll all be happy together.
Well,
but the diagnosis doesn't go away.
right, very true. But to circle back around to the beginning of our discussion, it looked like 90% of the people had their own pipelines that they're writing, and there was a 10% in this group that were standardized. Did I read the room wrong on that? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of, I guess, build off of that. What we can do today without MCP, by just pointing at documentation, you have your repository, you have your configuration, say, I want to make this change, and if your documentation is sufficient, the LLM can make the change for you. So like that's something that's tractable today. You don't need MCP or anything. It doesn't help you by making the decisions. But I mean, even if you don't have golden path pipelines, if you're just using some system, if you're using Jenkins or Tecton or whatnot, and there's documentation, oh, you want to add SBOMs, this is how you do it. Here's even a task you can use. This is how you add it in there. And like I was amazed when I was just playing around with it, and it just like changed all my Tecton pipelines, and there was linting errors, and it fixed it. And like it can alleviate some sort of burden, especially if you never really update your pipelines. I don't update my pipelines, but I need to update it for this. So how can I be helped by pointing it out, by adding the documentation to that context?
Right next door.
Thank you. I think I want to ask a question. What's the vision? Is it that the LLM will help author pipelines? I think it's the words you used. Or will the LLM like be the pipeline? Like to write a bunch of MCP servers for it implies that the LLM is taking the orchestrating actions to make the whole, and that's like.
I'm terrified of that one. Right?
It's, yeah.
Provenance is a non-starter there.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you prove?
Build me in some indeterminate environment that you just decided maybe would be good. No thank you.
Yeah. I finished to say if the vision is just to author pipelines, like LLMs can do that today. You can use one of the code assistant tools to author them out, and that works. But you don't need MCP servers for that.
Oh.
Oren Clay, Apex Home Care. I tend to work in small, mid-sized medical organizations, so I tend to be in the source of the worst practices. Broadly, when I'm dealing with management and smaller teams especially, I find that handing it off to AI for writing the pipelines is usually a recipe for failure, because especially in small teams, you're dealing with people who tend to not have high levels of experience. And that's an area where deterministic, like Brent had pointed out, and having clear and good examples is usually a better recipe for long-term success, because I'm able to go, okay, put in whatever example you used to modify and build out what you wound up with into the documentation source. Now, 3-5 years later, we can go back to that and go, okay, well, we need to modify this again. We have the example to work from. We have what we wound up with, and we're able to start figuring out what we can and can't do to make it run better.
So the two things that I think from this conversation, what I've pulled away is that, and I'm in agreement with most of us grizzled vets, that I don't need to stand up a pipeline with an MCP server. But to Bob's point, I would love to know what went wrong in my pipeline. And I would love to have an MCP server so that I don't have to leave my VS Code to find out why my build failed. And then that got me thinking, I don't have an IDP, an internal developer portal. So I've got an internal developer platform, but onboarding onto it is a nightmare. Right? So every time you want to do something new piece of it, right? The onboarding procedure is a nightmare, but we onboard a lot more than I thought we did. If I had agentic onboarding in my VS Code, so I start a project with a Git repo and I put it in agent mode and I go, I need to onboard, and then my MCP server onboards me, that seems very, very, very valuable to me, because now I don't have to write an IDP. You know, and I don't know any of you guys have messed with Backstage, but it's a nightmare, 100% nightmare. And I would rather have my developer never leave his IDE. I've been preaching this for years. So
I think that the idea is having a different way to do the interoperability with MCPs and not necessarily have them running the workflow completely. It sounds like that. And it sounds, yeah, and it also sounds like it's still analyzing the workflow is still a problem. It continues to be a pain. And so in that vein, should the CD Foundation have a SIG that focuses on solving this problem?
So I wanted to add something. It actually lands nicely with what you just asked, is thinking about, there's really two classes of users that we typically deal with. There's going to be the producers. These are the ones who create the pipelines, that manage the pipelines, that make sure that everything's working. And then there's going to be the consumers of those types of things. And so in my mind, it's really focusing in on that consumer experience. Back to the point of never leaving the IDE, this was one of the areas that we focused on with our very first AI integration, which was how do we ensure that the developer never leaves Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio or whatever the case may be, they can still interact with the various pipelines and providing that type of thing. But we're really focused in on the end user experience. We really did not focus at all about the producer experience. It's really that consumer experience is what we're really focused on.
I think something related to that I've been wondering about, because I haven't, of course, had time to go experiment with it, is like you have these producers which are generating documentation. You have users which might be pointing their local models or their LLMs at the documentation, but how can you improve that workflow? How can you, as a producer, add appropriate metadata to the documentation? How can, to ensure that when you're consuming it, that you improve the quality of the signal that's coming out? Like if you just have like YQ statements or something in there to modify your pipeline or JQ statements, then that's something very easy for the model to pick up locally and make the changes and whatnot. So like that seems like a very good best practice to integrate into documentation, but like it's too much for the readers to just casually read. So put it there, but make it discoverable with a collapsible box so that when you're reading it, you only see it if you need to, so you don't bloat the documentation too much. Like these are some challenges which I feel like are very tractable to explore.
Well, I'd say if there's anybody here who would like to step up and lead a SIG on, analyzing the pipeline and looking for ways to identify where the problems are, please let me know, and I will bring it up to the TOC and see if we can get that SIG created. But we definitely have to have leadership and individuals who have background in doing it. All right, I'm going to ask another crazy question, and this we kind of called this the cybersecurity. CI/CD and cybersecurity, and everything we've been talking about is an issue for adding more tooling to the pipeline, what security tooling you're doing. We also should be asking the OpenSSF or telling them what we also need. One of the areas that have come up is software debloating. I know it sounds like it's a terrible way of describing pruning open source packages. I really would like to get an understanding of where people's heads are at when it comes to having a potential service or a way to go find libraries that have been successfully debloated. Because this speaks to minimizing the number of vulnerabilities that we're pulling in through the software supply chain. There was a question about maybe bringing in a SIG for software supply chain. This is the essence of it. How do we have fewer packages coming through the pipeline? We get rid of the ones we don't need. But that's always, I know in the past, has been a scary thought for folks, taking out packages that you may need and you don't know if you need them. So I'd love to hear just thoughts on this process of minimizing the number of packages we pull through the pipeline. I know, it's like, wow, Tracy, you're asking us some crazy questions today. Let's hear from, yes.
Thank you. And your name? Sure. My name is Arvind Karan, and I'm from eBay. And so software debloating, again, definitely can help us a lot in terms of reducing the build time, deployment duration as well. So again, we are working on some of the efforts to actually remove dead code, right? So cleaning up the dead code, we do see that it is improving the build times. And again, software debloating definitely to me like falls under that category in terms of removing like unused open source libraries as well. So I think can be very useful.
Could you expand a little more on how, are you debloating internally written code in libraries, or are you looking at open source packages?
No, internally used libraries, and if what we do is like if there are not like much traffic to it and like not being code is not being used, we remove the dead code, and if there is associated open source libraries that can be removed as part of the dead code removal, then we can remove that as well.
Jamie O'Byrne at JP Morgan. I was just curious, is there any data on like how much software is not being used by open source projects?
There's Steve.
So there's some research projects out there that have been done at the university level, and one of them I looked at, they went and took a pretty popular, I think it was a Node program, and what happens is they have 15 direct dependencies, and then from those 15 direct dependencies, it goes to a couple transitive, and then there's a transitive that then brings in another 1,000 as it works its way back. So when you go through this process of looking at how to debloat it, there's two ways to do it. One is to do a stub. So you basically stub out code that's not used, so the function's still there or the method's still there, but then you could chop off that dependency branch and get rid of it. The other way is just to go on the full-out removal. When they did their analysis of the debloating, they reduced the size by like 80%. The number of vulnerabilities that were exposed went down by over 50%. What they did was their methodology was to pick projects that, this kind of goes to Emma's talk earlier, that had 90% test coverage of their code base. And when they went and debloated something, they went and ran the test case to make sure they were still hitting the 90% mark. So that gave them a high level of confidence that they didn't break anything as part of that process. So the approach would be, if you didn't have any test cases, you wouldn't do it. Does that make sense? So that's how they covered their butt on that.
Yeah, so the question for the group here is, if there was a way to debloat software in your pipeline, would you use it or would you be afraid?
I don't know that it would make sense to put it in the CD pipeline, because when is it going to trigger? Just randomly someday we're going to start blocking software because it contains as many dependencies as it did yesterday, but that's now too many. We could do that.
What if there was a library that you could reference that had already been debloated?
Now I've got more dependents. But I think it makes sense as like a remediation like workflow that like there's we were talking about Renovate in the talk earlier, something like Renovate, not Renovate itself, but that is analyzing repos that are associated with whatever the domain is and then proposing updates, that then get run through the CI/CD system, but it doesn't feel like a feature of the CI/CD system itself.
So for me, bloat detection is a very human-centered exercise because we have to assess, is the dependency there? Is it actually necessary? What will it take to remove it even if it's necessary? So our story was Yahoo UI ended development, 12 years ago. We analyzed and found we want to get rid of this thing. Really, it's 12-year-old JavaScript. It's really, really dead JavaScript. And we spent 12 months getting rid of all the callers to the thing in all the places because it was bloat, but the bloat was used. And that didn't make it any less valuable. It was bloat, but the bloat detection was it's outdated, unmaintained, and needs to go. So for me, it's a different game.
So this is Brett again. I'm going to give you guys a story, and it's a great story. So stop using libraries to do simple things you can just write. Okay? It's a great idea. We should do this. Okay? I was swinging around through some code, and I got my SBOMs, going through my licenses. I run into an AGPL license, right? In a proprietary software company, I freaked out. Okay? We ship. If this goes to a customer, I'm dead, right? I'm a security guy, he could get fired. But I also work on the pipeline, so they won't fire that guy, but I will lose my security title. So the thing is, I run in this AGPL library, and then I go and I look it up, and I find out what it is, and it's a string builder. It was used in one place, in thousands of lines of code, one place.
That's another form of bloat. That is a very real
So,
form of bloat.
so
Misuse or
yeah,
mistaken
so
use, right?
eBay's use case is a great place to start, right? If you've got dead code, delete it. It's the best thing you will do for your security posture, okay? Use a language that knows it's dead code, like Rust. You know, run a linter against your Go that knows it's dead code. Golang CI lint will tell you you have dead code. Remove it. Start removing code. Deleting things is how you get rid of CVEs, by the way. And then the other stuff is just what I said, like go through and do a health check on use your SBOM, bang it against deps.dev, bang it against ecosystems, and this is what we should talk about is a way to do, OpenSSF has the scorecard, right? We should be able to improve the scorecard to have more of this, hey, you're using this library, buddy, and you don't need it. So that's what some ideas I have on those type of things.
I was gonna. You were asking about how to basically surface this information. Brett stole my thunder. I was gonna say it seems like scorecard is the most logical place, but I mean I think also going off of what has been said, bloat's not a one-time reduction. Bloat's a mindset change. You have to continuously do it. So if you're trying to say here are a set of dependencies which have been debloated, that I feel like is instantly stale, just like vulnerabilities are instantly stale, because the next change can be adding bloat back. So it's a mindset change, or potentially tooling change, or language change to how to encourage the continuation of that debloating effort.
Writing string builders with AI is really fast.
I noticed a thing that we are always. Hi, my name is Neetu Jain. I work for JP Morgan Chase. But whatever I say is my personal opinion, just a disclaimer. So I noticed that we're all talking about software code, writing software and all. But now we have infrastructure as code as well. So we are writing policies in code. We are writing so many things as code. And there's another kind of bloat when you're writing policies, right? Sometimes you're not always writing very restrictive. It's like, let's just cover all these spaces and all that. And then there are dead policies. You don't know which policies are being hit, which is a security risk. It might be too open, the policy, but everybody's afraid to remove that policy to be able to know whether it's dead code and all. That is code. It's just not software code where the lint will not work. You have to have like a lab, a simulated, probably similar kind of a lab to be able to actually know whether somebody is hitting this firewall or not. Can I remove this rule? Can I remove this? So just wanted to put that it's not just software, code, but like in everything excess code that you're writing, it's just adding more and more bloat because the person who's writing it might not write it in the most restrictive, most efficient way.
I really like that. That was perfect. The one thing I wanted to add on top of that is just also when you think about bloat is also surfacing the open source projects that have been abandoned. Those packages, those libraries. I mean, that could be a pretty significant way to debloat as well. Like we encountered internally, there was I can't remember. I think it was Nancy FX, was abandoned. They just basically said we're archiving the GitHub repo, deal with it. And so we had to go through and rewrite all of that code and transform it over to another library and everything like that. So also surfacing that, I think, would be a big part of the debloating software as well.
How about some folks in the back row here? Yes.
Hey, I'm Phil, still from SEO. Agreed with much of the bloating talk. Yeah, I've had product teams now. So I oversee our SBOM program. So I got to be the one hounding everybody to go create their SBOMs. And we asked earlier, what are valuable things you get out of your SBOMs? Well, I was visiting a product team 3 weeks ago, and their lead was proudly showing me that they figured out they could axe these 2 direct dependencies, and it was dropping 250 items out of their SBOM.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the visibility really matters. The other thing that comes in is how targeted are the dependencies you're bringing in? Because in the JavaScript ecosystem particularly, there's a lot of bloat around compatibility, which makes sense for e-commerce. I want everybody's browser to render my site well, right? No matter what browser, what version, how old, I don't care. I just want them to give me money. Well, that brings a lot of extra support with it. The more targeted you are with your dependencies, the more constrained your use cases, the easier it is to remove just excess libraries or just very rare use cases that really just don't need to be there in that package in the first place.
So in general, we don't want to keep you for the entire lunch break, so we'll try to wrap up here. When it comes to debloating, should we be looking at doing more research on this? Is that something that the CD Foundation might want to take a leadership role on? Let's just get hands who thinks that debloating is an area that should be worked on by the CD Foundation. So out of this large group, there's only 4 of us who believe that that would be an issue, that would be something that would be important.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure it's tractable for CDF. I think it's a human thing that requires analysis, and I'm not sure that foundation level effort is the thing. So that's why my hand did not go up.
I thought I heard the question was, should the CD Foundation do research on this?
Yes.
And if it's research, I could use that research to go to my business leaders and say, hey, we need this initiative to debloat or whatever. But I can't go do that without this research. So if it's just a research, I'm for it. But if it's just to provide a solution, then I'm in the same boat as you. That I don't think there's a solution here yet.
I don't think we have a solution. I don't think we know the requirements for building a solution. And I don't think we know if there is cultural issues that we have to cross in order to be able to deliver a debloating system. But the question was, should we do research on it? Should we have a special interest group that's focused on looking into ways that debloating may be used and build requirements around it and do research and seeing if that can be achieved?
I would agree to it if we could apply it to, if you told me that software bloating was hurting my CD pipeline, then that research would be, how does debloating the software improve our pipelines? And that type of research is probably a little bit more tractable to the CD Foundation than, hey, I'm a developer, I went and used a string builder because I can't write SQL. So, I mean, if we keep the focus on CD, I mean, that's why we're all here, is because we're all involved in CD or care about CD. And so that would be my opinion on that.
Tim again from the state of Delaware. I just want to dig into the meta recursive nature of this conversation, that pipelines are built with software and pipelines are used to build software. And part of what SBOMs and a lot of the things we're using in our pipelines to strengthen building and deployments of releases, et cetera, is designed to help incentivize debloat in the things that are being pipelined. And if our pipelines are bloated as well, then it just means that we need to double down on doing the things that we're already saying we're going to do and make sure that they're being implemented at every layer of software. And that as you get into the higher, the higher sphere of orchestration tooling software, that they should still be doing the same things when it comes to SBOM. And I love what you pointed out, that just seeing a massive list and seeing some things that can be axed can cause a big drop. Like that would just happen. I don't know that, I don't know that debloating is specifically a CI/CD thing. I think it's a software thing, and it is going to serve this initiative just the same as it will any development community. That's kind of what I'm hearing here.
Yes, and if we started with SBOMs, and we talked about, you know, SBOMs are somewhat a checkbox. I think that was a pretty strong agreement that most companies see it as a checkbox. But we end with SBOMs being the way to get to software debloating, right? So the use case, potential use case for SBOMs is to take the next step and do the debloating. And can that be automated? Is this an application for AI? These are things that we are looking at, not just building a tool. And I know we're all, DevOps engineers love to script, and we always like to write the solution. But we have to be thinking about, what does our pipeline look like tomorrow? What direction should we be taking pipelines? Because pipelines have gotten long in the tooth. We don't have a lot of talk about them. In some ways, DevOps engineers are being replaced by platform engineering. So what do we need to do ourselves to stay relevant and to be part of the security conversation? And I hope that leaving this discussion, it stimulates some thought around the CD pipeline and what the CD Foundation should be looking at in terms of new SIGs and new life in a process that will always be with us. It's never going to go away, but we have to evolve. And we are, but not. It feels like we're evolving to fix ourselves. We're not evolving to do something new. And we need to do stuff new.
Andrew from Red Hat again. I think like the comment about SBOM as a solution, similar to comments before about like what do you do with the provenance. We have these guidelines that say you should do this. This is generally good for your supply chain. This is how you can mitigate risk and whatnot. But like what we've done is we've taken that internally and we started using it. And so when people ask, how do you use it? And do you use it? Well, yes, we do. And we use provenance ourselves. We don't just generate it for somebody else. We use it for ourselves because we know the value of it and because the provenance we generate is special in that it's very detailed based on the architecture that we have. And like, I feel like there are questions around SBOMs. What can you do with it? It's other than to satisfy compliance. What can you do with provenance other than to try and mitigate the attack surface? And like that within the scope of CD, like maybe that's a place that can be beneficial. Like we have these artifacts, we have this metadata that has been recommended from various circles that you create within your pipeline. Well, what's the big deal about it? You can use it on your own. What are the requirements that you need in order to be able to trust it? Can you trust the provenance if it's generated within your own pipeline? Well, maybe, but you can trust it to a different level than if it's generated from some external observer. And yeah.
So I know we covered some kind of topics that seem like they're way out of the CI/CD pipeline, but I'm not convinced that they are. Is there something that we didn't talk about today that somebody has thought about that we should hear? Wow.
We didn't talk about what the next generation of CI/CD should look like. You know, it's like we talked about the problems that we know about, but what are the problems that will come in future? Like with AI and agents coming, I want the CI/CD to know if there is, let's say, a biased model being used for something that it should not be used. You know, it has high risk impact. I want, for example, the pipeline to detect if there's some sensitive information being stored somewhere that should be stored more securely, or there's encryption missing, or somebody is using software keys where based on the context of the application, it clearly makes sense to use hardware keys. You know, like a more intelligent pipeline to make decisions, or at least informed decisions about that application, not just based on software, but the whole context. Maybe a model is accessing a data, or an agent, maybe like in fintech, maybe a PCI data is interacting with non-PCI data. Should that be allowed, or should not be allowed, or just a flag that this is happening? Who's looking into these? And I'd love to hear what others think the next generation of pipeline should look like.
And on that, I think we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for attending this. I think she summarized that pretty well. I'm going to be around. If there was something that you thought about and you want to chat, just grab Kate or Steve. We'll be happy to have a conversation. And again, if there's anybody who's willing to step up for a couple of SIGs, it looks like the supply chain SIG is something that you guys might want to bring back. And the other would be analyzing the pipeline data to see what went wrong. I don't know the name of that SIG, but I'm sure you guys could come up with it. We do need more, more involvement. We need more thought leadership, and we need more discussion on these topics, and the SIGs are the place to do it. So get involved. Thank you.